Have it. I've received a letter from the honourable member for Wentworth proposing a definite matter of public importance be submitted to the House for discussion, namely the threat posed by the government's mismanagement. Mismanagement of the national broadband network rollout. I call upon those honourable members who approve of the proposed discussion to rise in their places. The member for Wentworth.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The national broadband network is the largest infrastructure project in our nation's history. It is also the most mismanaged. This project was undertaken by the Rudd and Gillard governments without any analysis of any kind as to whether the approach they were taking was the most cost-effective or indeed the most safe. Despite going to the 2007 election with a policy that said the Commonwealth would not invest in any infrastructure project without a rigorous cost-benefit analysis, and despite having established a specialist agency, Infrastructure Australia, to do precisely that, in this, the biggest project in our nation's history, no such analysis was done. This is the biggest blank cheque written in our country's history. The government has no idea how long this project will take. It doesn't know what it will cost. No idea. Our own analysis suggests making some very conservative changes to the financial assumptions that it is likely to cost $94 billion as opposed to the $44 in the now utterly discredited corporate plan. The project is running so far behind schedule it would put an arthritic snail to shame. And I refer you, Mr Speaker, to these numbers. In its corporate plan published at the end of 2010, the first corporate plan, it said it was going to pass 950,000 brownfield premises by June 30. In August last year, it scaled that back to 286,000 premises to be passed by June 30. As of the end of March, it was scaled back again, saying they would only reach between 155,000 and 175,000. And as of mid-May, we are told they had only passed just over 70,000 homes. This is a classic case. This would remind honourable members, if it had anything to do with marketing or salesmen, this is a case of an unsuccessful salesman who has an annual target and doesn't make any sales in January and says, "Don't worry, boss, it's going to ramp up. No sales in February, no sales in March, no sales in April," until you finally get to November. He hasn't made any sales and says, "Don't worry, it's going to be a brilliant Christmas. We're going to get the whole year." The hockey stick becomes so steep it's vertical. And that's what the NBN Co's plan looks like at the moment. In the second half of last year, they passed 137 houses per working day. So far this year, they've been passing 353 houses a working day. The only problem is that their plan, their target, at this time is to be passing 1,028 houses a working day, and they would have us believe that in 2 years they'll be passing 5,500 every working day. So they're going to increase their rollout volume by a factor of 15. This project is failing. We've had the unedifying spectacle of the chairman, the new chairman of the NBN Co, Ms Siobhan McKenna, saying that she doesn't want the minister to speak to the chief executive other than through her. We've had reports in the press saying that she wants the chief executive to be sacked. She wants to be the executive chairman. When this rather disturbing news was put to Mr Quigley in Senate estimates, the minister, Senator Conroy, intervened and would not allow him to answer the questions and would not rebut the proposition himself. So can you imagine, Mr Speaker, a situation where you had a public listed company and the chairman was reported as having no confidence in the chief executive and wanting to have him sacked, and that matter not being put to rest almost immediately? It would be a completely untenable situation. But this is the disaster that the government is presiding over. Now, let me now talk to the latest example of mismanagement, and the question of asbestos. It has been known for many, many years that there are pits and ducts in Telstra's network which are made of asbestos-containing material, asbestos fibrocement, in other words. And this has been a matter that Telstra has taken seriously, and they have elaborate procedures to deal with it, so that when ducts are broken, a truck runs over them, or new holes have to be bored in them for new ducts, or anything of that kind, there are elaborate procedures for doing that. And in 2009, however, we know that an AWU official known to the Minister for Workplace Relations wrote to Mr Shorten, then the Parliamentary Secretary, and raised the issue of the asbestos in the Telstra ducts and pits. And the then Parliamentary Secretary, now the Minister, wrote back to Telstra and sought some explanation about it. And Telstra came back to him and responded, as we know, and said that they had a whole procedure with dealing with asbestos-containing material, but where the infrastructure was not friable and when it was buried, it was safer left in situ because it was not exposed to air and there wasn't any interference with it. And they had a logical risk management process. So that's what he was told, because the minister was then proposing that Telstra should literally dig up every single pit it had and every piece of presumably asbestos-containing material in its ducts, which would have been a gigantic exercise, and as Telstra's chief executive advised him, would obviously raise real issues of health risk. So it was a risk management position. But as of 2009, of course, the NBN was only just established. The company was formed in April of 2009, and there was no plan to disturb Telstra's pits. Work was done on to replace them from time to time when they had to be repaired, when things broke or there was some upgrade. But then along came the NBN. And the deal with the NBN and Telstra is to use all of Telstra's infrastructure, all of its pits and ducts. And what has happened is that Telstra has an obligation to upgrade those pits where they are too small for the multi-port device that the NBN is using for its fibre rollout. So many of these pits, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these pits, are too small and have to be removed and replaced with a plastic pit. And that is Telstra's responsibility to do that work. So you go from a position in 2009 where interference and disturbance of Telstra's pits, which, as it was well known, many of which did contain asbestos, was an infrequent occurrence, to one where virtually every single pit in the country was likely or liable to be disturbed in this fashion. Furthermore, because Telstra's ducts, and these are the pipes that carry the various cables, be they copper or fibre, around the country, because the ducts are filled with Telstra copper and in many cases don't have the space to take the new fibre optic cables of the NBN Co, those ducts have to be augmented, with new pipes being put into the ground. And that responsibility, Mr Speaker, is actually not Telstra's, that is the NBN Co's. And if those new pipes have to enter into a duct, an existing pit that's made out of fibrocement, then of course there is an asbestos issue. So the Minister, Senator Conroy, was quite wrong yesterday when he said that the asbestos management issue was only an issue for Telstra. It is an issue for the NBN Co as well. And in any event, all of the work that is being done by Telstra is for and on behalf of the NBN Co. So we go from 2009 with a minister that is very alert to, very much on notice to the asbestos issue with Telstra's infrastructure, but at a time when that infrastructure was being rarely disturbed. Fast forward 18 months or so later, and you're in a position where the Telstra infrastructure is being entirely disturbed. It is being remediated and augmented almost in its entirety. And it follows, therefore, and the minister knew this very well because he noted this in his own correspondence, it follows, therefore, that asbestos becomes a much bigger issue. And the question that the opposition has been pursuing is, why did the minister apparently not raise this? By this stage he'd come into Cabinet in 2011. Why did he not raise it with the Minister for Communications?
That's a very good question.
Or did he? And we haven't learned about it yet. Why did he not raise it with Telstra or NBN Co prior to Ray Hadley making a big issue of the asbestos risk in Penrith last week? Why did this Member of Parliament, whose history and experience in the trade union movement gave him a special awareness of asbestos issues, why, fixed with that actual knowledge of the risk associated with Telstra's pits and ducts, and knowing that they were all going to be disturbed, why did he then apparently take no action? Well, we have no answer to that. Now, the minister said today that the coalition was somehow or other being irresponsible in suggesting that all of the Telstra asbestos-containing material should not be immediately replaced, shouldn't be dug up and replaced. Well, Mr Speaker, this is a risk management issue, and Telstra's current asbestos management procedures, which is a public document, says, and I quote from page 9, "Asbestos-containing conduits and pits in good condition do not need to be removed as a matter of course. However, where they present a hazard to staff or members of the public, they will be made safe or replaced following the removal practice in this procedure." And it's interesting that the minister has accused the opposition of seeking to make a political issue out of this. But in fact, what he has done is create a massive scare campaign which runs the risk of being a sort of public hysteria, creating enormous anxiety about asbestos. Because what he said in the House today is that all of the asbestos-containing material in Telstra's network, even if it is buried under the ground, should be replaced. What then, Mr Speaker, are people to think about asbestos that is built into their houses, into schools, into hospitals, into industrial buildings, asbestos-containing material that is inert, that is intact? He is on the edge in his effort to place all of the blame for this on Telstra and try to make himself a hero on this issue. He's on the verge of creating something in the order of a national panic, because there is no question that asbestos is a very serious issue. There's no doubt about that. But there is also a very important risk management issue. If asbestos is in a building structure, or particularly if it's buried under the ground, and if it is intact, and if it is inert, and if it is not exposed to the air, and it is not being broken or damaged or having people drill through it, then one has to take a very hard-headed and practical view as to whether it should be proactively removed, because in any process of removal, no matter how well managed, you are going to have some risk of the asbestos fibres escaping. And there are, Mr Speaker, very disturbing resonances between this episode and the pink bats. See, with pink bats, we had a roof insulation industry that was putting roof insulation in as and when required, and was doing so in accordance with safety standards. And then the government turbocharged that industry by pouring so much money into it. Many, many more people became involved, and of necessity, safety standards much harder to enforce, compliance was much harder to supervise, and the tragedies that occurred did occur. And this is what has happened here. You had asbestos being treated as an important issue by Telstra, as and when it was necessary to do so, but with the pits and the ducts being rarely disturbed. But now, of course, They are being disturbed, all of them. And as a consequence, you have many more people working on it. It is harder to enforce standards. I'm not making any excuses. The standards should be enforced and I hope will be enforced. But you have of necessity a much greater challenge. And yet, knowing all of that and knowing the experience of pink bats, this minister, unless there's something he hasn't told us, did nothing.
Order. The member's time has expired. I call the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, the honourable member for Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the member for Wentworth providing us with a chance to set the record straight on what has been a disgraceful fear campaign by the Coalition. Deputy Speaker, as with any major national project, there's important conversations that policymakers need to have about what we want to achieve and how best to set about achieving it. So I want to speak first about why Australia needs the national broadband network, a fibre-to-the-home network, and then discuss the issues of asbestos that the honourable member has raised and how the government's responding to those. Deputy Speaker, the simple fact is that in a 21st century developed country, access to the internet is a form of basic infrastructure. It is to our generation as the water and electricity networks were to generations before. The member for Wentworth knows this. He has great knowledge of the information technology industry, certainly unlike his leader, a self-confessed I'm no tech head. But the member for Wentworth might cast his mind back to 1923, when construction began on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Back then, Sydney was home to fewer than 40,000 cars, not enough to cause a single traffic jam. But when construction on that bridge began, the policymakers of the era built a bridge capable of carrying 6 lanes of traffic, flanked by an extra 2 lanes for trains. It might have seemed a bold move, but as the member for Wentworth well knows, and as his constituents would well know, the Sydney Harbour Bridge is now an indispensable artery to the city's transport system. Over 160,000 cars cross the bridge daily, 4 times the entire number of cars that existed in the city of Sydney when the bridge was first began construction. And the point here, Deputy Speaker, is that the Sydney Harbour Bridge wasn't designed for Sydney of the 1920s. It was designed for, and it continues to serve, a Sydney of the future. And it's that same spirit with which Labor first proposed a national broadband network. We don't know much about how our we don't know precisely how our technological use will change in the future. But one way of thinking about this, Deputy Speaker, is to think about how our own IT usage has changed just in the past 10 years, and then imagine it changing just as dramatically again. And that's why, Deputy Speaker, we need the national broadband network. Under the NBN, every home, every business will have access to superfast internet via optic fibre, fixed wireless and satellite technologies. And for 93% of homes and business, this will be a national fibre network. The point here, Deputy Speaker, is that unlike copper, which transmits electrical current, fibre uses pulses of light to transmit information. And over recent years, engineers have steadily been achieving more rapid fibre transmission speeds, up from 100 megabits a second a few years ago to 1,000 megabits a second today. That's the difference, Deputy Speaker, between being able to download a CD full of information every 5 seconds rather than every 50 seconds. And the Boffins don't think they've found the speed limit on fibre just yet. Some tests suggest it could be up to 1,000 times faster again. Unlike copper, fibre to the premises is an information superhighway without a speed limit. And Deputy Speaker, people in my own electorate of Fraser are already seeing the benefits the NBN has to offer. Gungahlin Library is part of the Gungahlin Digital Hub, where residents are able to learn more about how to access the NBN. They're running free training sessions covering a range of computer basics, everyday online activities, online safety and security and connection options. I'd encourage those opposite, whether they call themselves tech heads or especially if they don't, to visit the Gungahlin Library to learn about how the NBN is delivering. I've welcomed the release of detailed maps by NBN Co, which show where the construction of the national broadband network will start. The maps show that NBN fibre has been rolling out across Civic, Acton and parts of Braddon, as well as in Gungahlin. And, Deputy Speaker, it's worth making the point that for all its conniptions about Labor's national broadband network, the Coalition has now adopted a policy which has a multi-billion-dollar price tag, has the same accounting treatment as Labor's NBN, but which ultimately will deliver far slower speeds than the NBN. So, Deputy Speaker, the need for the national broadband network is clear. I want to turn now, though, to the issue that the member for Wentworth has raised over managing asbestos risk during the rollout. And as has been made clear during question time, the health and safety of Australian workers and Australian communities is our number one priority. As the opposition would be well aware, Telstra has accepted full responsibility for the issue. The government is expecting Telstra and its contractors to follow Australia's strict laws on the handling and removal of asbestos in preparing its pits and ducts for the rollout of the NBN. Those pits and ducts are owned by Telstra and used by NBN Co. We've announced that the first National Asbestos Exposure Register will be created and maintained by the new National Asbestos Safety and Eradication Authority. And, Deputy Speaker, this continues a strong tradition in the Australian Labor movement, leading the national charge on identifying and eradicating the scourge of asbestos and asbestos-related disease. It was the Labor movement, Deputy Speaker, that got asbestos banned, blue in 1967, brown in the mid-1980s, white in 2003. That happened thanks to pressure from the Labor movement. And there can't be any shortcuts with asbestos safety. We understand that. We've acted. Deputy Speaker, there's been a number of incidents in recent times through the remediation of Telstra's pits and ducts, and that includes in Penrith. There's been at least one as a result of work being done by contractors to NBN Co. And when you're doing work in the telecommunications industry and doing this type of work, you will deal with asbestos-contaminating material. That's well known. What the most important issue is, and the one the governments continue to focus on, is to ensure the strict laws in place for the handling and removal of asbestos are followed at all times. It doesn't matter if you're Telstra, if you're NBN Co, if you're a builder doing renovations, asbestos has to be dealt with in a safe and appropriate way. And the Coalition can't pretend that this issue would not arise under their policy. If you're advancing fibre to the node technology, as the opposition does, they've accepted that it is a slower technology. It will deliver slower broadband speeds, but it will also involve working in areas with asbestos risk. To suggest otherwise, Deputy Speaker, is to suggest that perhaps we're intending to leave the copper in the ground forever, that Australia will forever have a copper network. Copper to the home is not something that anyone believes Australia will have in a century's time. NBN Co is continuing to assess the situation, but it doesn't expect it to impede the overall rollout. The construction process already takes into account a period of several months in each area for Telstra to remediate its infrastructure. And the remediation of Telstra's infrastructure is carried out by Telstra, it's paid for by Telstra. Telstra is known for 30 years about the presence of asbestos in its pits, and this is a process which can be managed by Telstra. Deputy Speaker, Labor's done more since 2007 than any previous government to combat the problem of asbestos. We've established the National Asbestos Agency, the National Asbestos Plan, a National Asbestos Exposure Register. Under the Gillard government, we established the Asbestos Management Review in 2010. Before that, there was no coordinated or consistent approach to managing asbestos beyond workplaces. That's why we've also introduced earlier this year legislation to Parliament to establish the Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency. In the 2013-14 budget, we've provided that agency with $10.5 million in funding over the next 4 years to help protect Australians from asbestos-related diseases. The agency will pave a new way for a national approach to asbestos eradication. It will handle asbestos awareness and education. It will administer a national strategic plan. Conversely, what can we say about the record of the Coalition on asbestos management? I'm sure some of the speakers who follow me will say something about the opposition leader's track record in this regard. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition was a lawyer who fought to deny compensation to thousands of victims of CSR's asbestos mine in Wittenoom. Back in 2004, it was Labor who shamed the Coalition to returning donations given to them by James Hardie. In 2007, as Health Minister, the Leader of the Opposition refused to list on the PBS a drug known as Limta, a drug which would ease the suffering of asbestosis patients.
Order. The parliamentary secretary will resume his chair. The member for Wentworth will resume his seat. The parliamentary secretary will speak to the motion.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I understand why those opposite are concerned about the track record of the two major parties when it comes to asbestos. As Fairfax Media has reported, in 2001 Telstra wanted to create an independent body to fast-track compensation payments to employees exposed to asbestos and sought approval from the then Department of Workplace Relations. The then Minister for Workplace Relations was the now opposition leader. And so the fact is that the opposition leader knew as far back as 2001 that Telstra was aware of asbestos in its infrastructure and sat on his hands. It is time, Deputy Speaker, for the opposition leader to explain what he knew, what correspondence he had with Telstra about asbestos in 2001 when he was Workplace Relations Minister, and why he chose to ignore it. In 2005, Deputy Speaker, a question on notice was asked of Minister McGorran, representing the Communications Minister, Senator Coonan, about Telstra's use of asbestos. The Minister provided an answer in February 2006, not exactly a speedy answer, but an answer nonetheless, that explained Telstra's use of asbestos in pits, ducts and exchanges and the possibility of exposure. So those opposite cannot argue that the Howard government was ignorant of this issue. The Howard government was in fact well aware of the issues with asbestos and Telstra's infrastructure. So, Deputy Speaker, those opposite have had a track record of standing up for James Hardie, while those of us on this side of the House have had a track record of standing up for those who have been affected by asbestos, of standing up for workers, of standing up for people like Bernie Banton. Deputy Speaker, we know the NBN is a necessity, and we're working to mitigate the risks that are generated by building the national broadband network. But only someone who argues that they will never open a single pit again can promise that this asbestos won't be disturbed. The Coalition's policy is a policy which builds fibre to suburban nodes. It's a kind of get your water at the village well kind of approach. If you want to build fibre from the node to the home, you'll have to pay for it yourself, $5,000 a pop. That's not only inequitable, Deputy Speaker, but it will mean that for many Australian households, their connections are 25 megabits a second at best. That's around 1/40th the speed of what the NBN can provide. Now, I'm sure slow upload and download speeds trouble the member for Wentworth, but they don't trouble the Leader for the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition has made the brash statement that he is, quote, confident 25 megs is enough for the average household. And I talked, Deputy Speaker, about what that kind of thinking in the 1920s would have meant for the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The Leader of the Opposition would have built a single-lane bridge because that was enough for the then 40,000 cars in Sydney. But we know we don't have to use infrastructure analogies. We can use IT analogies. Deputy Speaker, when I first bought my first computer in 1984, it had 3.5 kilobytes of memory. I don't think we send emails these days with so little memory. But in fact, in that period, the then computer editor of the Sydney Morning Herald, Gareth Powell, wrote that he thought no program would ever need more than 16 kilobytes. And statements like that are a warning to anyone who forgets that the things we can do with technology far outpace our imagination. The sort of statements by the Leader of the Opposition suggesting that 25 megabits a second is enough ought to embarrass the member for Wentworth, and I know trouble many prominent Australians. Dr Karl Krusniewski recently told me he regularly talks to school classes using Skype. He says with the Australian classes, the copper connection's unreliable, has to be reset a couple of times an hour. But if he talks to Korean or Japanese students, he can expect uninterrupted, high-resolution video conference. That, Deputy Speaker, is what the national broadband will deliver to Australians.
I call the honourable member for Cowper.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this very important matter before the House, because this is a debate about competence and integrity. It's about competence because the government and NBN Co knew that asbestos would be a key challenge for the NBN project, and they have miserably failed to meet that challenge. It's about integrity because the government's dishonesty and lack of accountability mean that Australian families cannot believe a word spoken by this Labor minister. But ultimately, today's debate is about ensuring that Australian families are not forced from their homes because a Telstra or an NBN Co contractor releases asbestos fibres into the air. This is about making sure that no worker contracts mesothelioma because he was working on the NBN rollout. This is about keeping Australian families safe. Although we do have our differences of opinion on many things, I think it is clear that both sides of Parliament do take this issue seriously. Ultimately, we have the best interest of Australian workers and families at heart. However, there is one member of this Parliament who does not seem to care a whole lot about this particular issue. At 4:53 p.m. yesterday, the member for Lyne tweeted this extraordinary comment, and I quote, "The asbestos beat-up on NBN is extraordinary politics." End quote. The Australian public can make what they will of this. However, I wonder whether the member for Lyne would still claim this was a beat-up if his family was forced to leave their home due to asbestos contamination. Would he think it's still a beat-up if it was his son or his daughter who may have been exposed to asbestos? I wonder whether the residents of Lyne would be pleased to know that their local member thinks that poorly trained contractors hacking into an asbestos-contaminated pit outside their house is just a beat-up. We may not all agree, but at the very least, I think it is reasonable to expect every member of this House to take this matter seriously. While most of us take the issue of asbestos management seriously, the government clearly lacks the competence to go with their concern. Asbestos was always going to be a key challenge of the NBN rollout. We know that the current Minister for Workplace Relations was aware of this issue as far back as 2009. Telstra have been aware of this issue for years. NBN Co has also been aware of this issue for years as well. So why are we having this debate? Why are we having families living in hotels in Sydney because their houses are contaminated with asbestos? Why did the government have to call a crisis meeting yesterday? And why is there a crisis at all? The answer is very simple. This government is completely incompetent. This government makes the hollow men and yes minister look like the very model of effective government. This government could not even give away free ceiling insulation without burning down people's houses. The government could not give away money to Australians during the GFC without sending cheques to dead people and pets. The Gillard Labor government will probably go down as Australia's worst government in history. But in the worst government in Australian history, the Minister for Broadband and Communications is a special type of incompetent. He tried to regulate the print media for the first time in our peacetime history and lost that battle in a fortnight. It seems he's just given up on anti-siphoning. His first try at the National Broadband Network died a quick death, and taxpayers had to pay compensation to Sky because of the way Senator Conroy handled the Australian network tender. Even if we set aside our philosophical differences about the best way to roll out the NBN to all Australians, NBN is still a failure because of this government's competence and inability to implement the most basic of policies. On an issue this serious, the least Australians can expect is that the government will be honest and open about the scale of the problem and the potential risk to families and the taxpayer. Unfortunately, as with other aspects of the NBN, you cannot trust a word that is said by NBN Co or the government. We have endured for years vague and misleading information from the government and NBN Co on every aspect of this project. I could provide the House with dozens of examples of misleading or vague information being provided by NBN Co and the government, but to save time I will mention just one. The following exchange is from the public hearings of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on the NBN in April, and I would like to quote. The member for Bradfield asked, "Are you finding that asbestos is a big issue across the board?" And the NBN CEO Mike Quigley replied, "What is your view, Ralph? I would not say it's a big issue." And then the Chief Operating Officer, Ralph Steffens, added, "No, it is present, as it would be anywhere in any geography, but it does not seem to be a huge problem at this stage." So apparently 2 months ago, asbestos was not a big issue. These are not my words. These are the words of Senator Conroy's hand-picked CEO for NBN Co. Well, it is a big issue. Families have been indefinitely moved out of their homes. Workers have been put at risk. The NBN rollout has been stopped at various locations around Australia. In some areas, Telstra says the rollout has stopped, while NBN Co says it's still going ahead. Who can we believe, Deputy Speaker? Yesterday, I must say I was impressed by the CEO of Telstra, David Thodey, who admitted there were problems with the way the issue had been handled by Telstra and promised to do everything he could to fix the problem. But we have not seen the same level of accountability or honesty from Senator Conroy or NBN Co. Senator Conroy has big questions to answer. The key question here is whether the government pushed NBN Co to accelerate the rollout to avoid the embarrassment that it currently suffers as to the very slow pace of the project, and in doing so pushed the contractors to cut corners. That is a question this minister must answer. We know the NBN is massively behind schedule, and we know it is getting further behind each and every day. That Senator Thistlethwaite came into my electorate in March last year and told my constituents that construction of the NBN would be complete in Taormina within 12 months. 14 months later, there's still no NBN in Taormina. And every day the rollout is delayed and the cost blows out just a little more. Senator Conroy says asbestos-related issues will not increase the cost of the network, but it's just more deceit on behalf of the government. Every day of delay increases the cost of the project. Proper management of NBN requires integrity and honesty. This project is being propped up by the Australian taxpayers who deserve to know the true state of the rollout and the risks and challenges of the project. Even my local paper, the Coffs Coast Advocate, has started questioning the lack of accountability of NBN Co in an article last week highlighting just how difficult it is to get any meaningful information out of NBN Co. The local paper said, and I quote, "The figures of how many customers have taken up high-speed broadband, however, remains firmly under wraps. NBN Co has refused to divulge localised sign-up figures to the media. Australians deserve to know the truth about the NBN rollout." Unfortunately, the current situation is just the latest blunder in a series of massive blunders by Senator Conroy and the Labor government. There are disturbing parallels between this situation and the pink bats debacle and the BER fiasco. On one hand, we have cost blowouts and waste typified in the BER debacle, and on the other hand, we have the risk to public safety created with relation to the giving away of pink bats. The NBN project is beset by delays and cost blowouts. Universal, affordable broadband access, it has the potential to improve business productivity and community amenity. Unfortunately, the latest crisis means that Australians with poor broadband services will be waiting even longer for decent broadband. This is not a beat-up. This is all about the government's mismanagement of the NBN. It is a national disgrace. It's time to get adults in charge of the project. The opposition has not been politicising this matter. We have approached it in a sober and measured way. We have brought it to the attention of the relevant authorities. It is the government's incompetence that is the problem here. Senator Conroy cannot just rest on the fact that Telstra is undertaking certain works. Senator Conroy is responsible for what is happening here. He has to take full responsibility. We have a situation where families right round the country do not feel safe in their homes because of the actions of this government, and it is Senator Conroy who clearly bears the responsibility for this. It is a project that has shown very poor levels of management. It is a project that is massively behind time. It is a project that is way over budget. It is a project that needs decent management if it's to be brought on track. I'm very pleased to be able to contribute to this matter of public importance today, because it very much is a matter of the utmost importance to this nation, both for its future in relation to technology rollouts, but also in relation to public health and safety.
I call the honourable member for Throsby.
Speaker, this is an important public debate around one of the most important pieces of infrastructure that is going to be built in this country in this century. It's unfortunate in many respects that the debate that surrounds this important piece of infrastructure doesn't live up to the importance of the project itself. In his 15-minute submission in this debate, Deputy Speaker, the member for Wentworth amused us with an analogy about the salesman who found it very difficult to shift a product. Well, I've got a salesman's analogy of my own, Deputy Speaker, and I think it's more apt. It's the truth that gets told to every salesman who's sent out there to flog a lousy product. And the rule that every salesman knows, if you've got to go out there and flog a lousy product, an inferior product, a one that's not nearly as good as the competition, Deputy Speaker, you don't talk about it. Don't talk about your own product, Deputy Speaker. Go out there and fling as much mud. Do as much nitpicking as possible. Do as much bagging and carping and whinging as possible about your competition's product, but for God's sake, never mention your own. Because once you mention your own, Deputy Speaker, everybody will realise what a lousy product it is. Is there any wonder? I mean, the member for Wentworth, there's no one. Now, the member for Wentworth actually understands his policy. He doesn't believe in it, but he understands his policy, unlike the Leader of the Opposition. I mean, the most awkward press conference that we have seen in the last 12 months, Deputy Speaker, was the press conference where the Leader of the Opposition was standing alongside the member for Wentworth to announce their policy. And for God's sake, I mean, you could see the member for Wentworth couldn't get out of there quick enough. His hands were in his pockets, he was fidgeting. The Leader of the Opposition, reading from notes, they had a very puzzled look upon his face because he didn't have a clue what he was talking about, Deputy Speaker. And that lies at the heart of this argument. You've got a Leader of the Opposition who doesn't understand his policy and a spokesman for that policy who doesn't believe in it. So is there any wonder that they are standing by that salesman's maxim, if you've got a lousy product in the marketplace, don't talk about it. Just go out there and bag the opposition. Go out there and bag the opposition, because you don't want anyone to focus on your own product. It's a slower product. It's a slower product that is going to cost the punters more for less. I mean, these guys have turned Joyce Mayne on her head. They're offering less for more, Deputy Speaker, less for more. Yeah, a three-tier program is what they're proposing, Deputy Speaker. For those who live in inner-city suburbs, like the member for Wentworth, they've probably already got fibre running past their houses and they've got the money to have it connected, or they've got a cable provision, or they can afford to buy the best sort of products and the best sort of services, unlike the rest of it. That's the top tier. Those people who live in those inner-city suburbs, who have the money and have the wealth to be able to buy the best broadband that is available. Then there's the second tier of people under their program, Deputy Speaker, the people who can afford to upgrade, because he's only proposing that they're going to bring the fibre to the node, and in common speak, Deputy Speaker, that could be 3 kilometres from your house. That could be 3 kilometres from your house. One of those little grey cabinets that sits in every suburb, that's what he's talking about, will bring the fibre to the node, and if you've got the dough, you might be able to spend a minimum of $5,000, more like $10,000, to drag the cable up to your premises, up to your street and get it connected. And then, if you have the money, you may be able to enjoy the same sort of broadband speeds, the same quality of service that the member for Wentworth enjoys in his very comfortable inner-city electorate. That's the second tier of people, Deputy Speaker. And then there's the third tier of people who live in the electorate that I represent, who don't live in the inner city, are unlikely to have the dough for the upgrade. Well, they get the worst service, a service that they currently can no longer afford, because their plan, Deputy Speaker, have no doubt about it, is to scrap the NBN and provide less for more. There'll be no joy in it for the residents of my electorate, Deputy Speaker, people who know that under Labor's plan, 67,000 houses and businesses within the electorate of Throsby are going to get the NBN. 67 houses and businesses by June 2016 are going to get the NBN, and it's already rolling past houses and businesses in my electorate, already rolling past houses and businesses in my electorate. And the only conversation I've had with people in my electorate, Deputy Speaker, is how quick can we get it on? How quick can we get it on? And for God's sake, I'm very afraid of what the other mob might do. People in suburbs like Albion Park, Deputy Speaker, people in suburbs like Albion Park, where they do not even get ADSL at the moment, Deputy Speaker. You know, after 11, 12, 13 plans from those who sit opposite, who have the temerity to lecture us on broadband policy, after all the years that they were in government and all the plans and all the networking the nation and the squandering of the resources from the Telstra sale, a few boondoggles here and there for members in National Party seats, they squandered that money, Deputy Speaker. Still no broadband to people who live in suburbs like Albion Park or Oak Flats or East Bowral, Deputy Speaker, where they don't even have access to ADSL at the moment. They won't have it under those opposite. They know that under a Labor plan they can see that they will have access to broadband, faster, cheaper, reliable broadband, dragging them into the 21st century. And all that is a threat, Deputy Speaker, from those on the other side. So is it any wonder that the lousy salesman, well, actually the good salesman for a lousy product, won't talk about their own product, Deputy Speaker? Is there any wonder that their strategy is to stand in this place and throw as much mud, as much muck that they can possibly find, even going, Deputy Speaker, to the desperate depths of attempting to get some political advantage out of citizens' legitimate concern about exposure to asbestos, to try and whip that up into a political hysteria for their own political advantage. I don't know how much further low you can get, Deputy Speaker, if that's what you've stooped to in political debate. Those opposite us, if you're going to, I've got to say, Deputy Speaker, if you're going to engage in a debate, in this parliament about asbestos, you should at least have some standing on the matter. You should at least have some standing on the matter. And when I look across those on the other side of the chamber, I see people who are left wanting, Deputy Speaker. I mean, this debate over the last 24 hours from those who represent parties, who whenever they've been given the opportunity in any of the state parliaments around this country to do something for occupational health and safety for the working men and women in this country, what have they done? They've done their darndest to dismantle the protections and to dismantle the compensation provisions that are currently enjoyed by working men and women in this country. That's what they've done. Whenever they've had the chance, Deputy Speaker, do something for the working men and women of this country, what they've gone is taken a hatchet to the protections that currently exist in all the state jurisdictions around the country. So if you're going to enter this debate, Deputy Speaker, you want to make sure that you're doing it on firm ground. You want to ensure that you have some standing on the matter. I mean, I know I have quite a bit of expertise in this matter, Deputy Speaker. I spent 3 years of my life campaigning for justice for people who are suffering from asbestos diseases. 3 years of my life running a campaign with other members in this House, including the Minister for Industrial Relations and the Minister for Industry, running a campaign to bring rogue companies like James Hardie to justice so that they could put in place a perpetual fund to look after the workers, the former workers and those who have been exposed to asbestos products produced by James Hardie. That's what we did with our lives before we came to Parliament, Deputy Speaker, looking after people to ensure that they got some justice. They got some justice for them, or more often than not, their families, Deputy Speaker, more often not their families. Because by the time that their legal challenges, by the time that their compensation claims were dealt with by the company, more often than not, the victim was dead. More often than not, the victim was dead, Deputy Speaker, and the compensation was there for their families. Well, Deputy Speaker, we have standing on this issue. We have standing on that matter. And when those on the opposite side of the chamber had their choice, Deputy Speaker, when they had their choice of fighting for the company or fighting for the workers who were exposed to asbestos products, they made their choice, Deputy Speaker. They made their choice. Like the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, they chose to fight for the company. They have no standing on this matter. They have absolutely no standing on this matter, and it should be seen for what it is, a conflated exercise in mud throwing, because the product that they are out there peddling in the market is a disgrace. They are offering less for more, and the people see through it. The people want the National Broadband Network, Deputy Speaker. The longest line in my electorate is Liberal Party members lining up saying and trying to take credit for the fact that the NBN is rolling past their streets and their suburbs and their houses.
The member's time
Speaker.
has expired. The member for Lyons on this MPI. Member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I've listened closely to the debate, not only in the chamber this afternoon, but over the last couple of days, and did want to put some thoughts on the record. As far as I can read, at the heart of this issue are two claims. One is that government didn't have the foresight in regards asbestos management in the pits and pipes that are owned by Telstra management and shareholders, and therefore have somehow been found wanting in issues in and around Penrith and potentially beyond. The other charge, as best as I can work through, is that one side of this chamber has an NBN policy that goes to all pits and pipes, and the other doesn't, and therefore the one that doesn't is somehow to get a brownie point for being a safer alternative to access to all pipes and pits. To take on both of those charges, the first is that asbestos isn't new. That should be stating the bleeding obvious. This has been around for a long time. It is a scourge in the building and construction industry. The level of knowledge in Australia around what asbestos is and its health implications has certainly changed behaviour within the industry, and that is across the board, and therefore the way asbestos is handled has a very high level of occupational health and safety attached to it across the board. Within the telecommunications industry, within communications, electrical and plumbing unions, they could all tell you that there are manuals in place, there are standards in place, and that Telstra, Telecom and equivalents in other providers all know the rules of the game when handling asbestos. To therefore then say there was a lack of foresight in agreements reached, I judge to be wrong. The option that this chamber could have taken in a significant upgrade and a much needed upgrade to telecommunications in Australia today, where the copper network is full, our use of data via fixed wire is going through the roof. We do need to, whoever is in government, upgrade the telecommunications network in this country. To argue a case that there was no foresight is wrong. The option that government could have taken in reaching an agreement with Telstra is to buy the pits and pipes. That was a very real option on the table. And oh, what a mistake that would have been. This is rubbish infrastructure. I would be surprised if Telstra today even has a clear map of where all the pits and pipes in our country are, as they've been developed over 60 years, going back to PMG days. They are rubbish infrastructure, waterlogged, asbestos-riddled. Yes, there's rust in there. And yes, this is infrastructure that government should not own, and I think happily does not own. The words of the CEO of Telstra, David Thodey, yesterday should have weight placed upon them in this debate. He accepted full responsibility for the management of asbestos in their pits and pipes. The manuals are in place, the rules of engagement on safe handling of asbestos are there. I think this chamber rightly, with a government, rightly should push the CEO, the management and the shareholders of Telstra to make sure they follow the rules that have been long established in how to handle asbestos in their pits and pipes. But to then, in this debate, try and draw a link that we should halt the national broadband network, as I understand is today's claim by the union, or we should halt the NBN, as seems to be the agreed position between the union and the Liberal National Party, is wrong. We just need to follow the long-established rules on the safe handling and management of asbestos. And we need to do that for the next decade, regardless of who's in office. There is going to be a completion of an upgrade of telecommunications. The words of the Liberal National Party in launching their NBN policy was that they will complete the NBN. Fibre to the node doesn't mean that you're bailing out, surely, of the last 500 metres to a kilometre. There is a voluntary engagement as part of the Liberal National Party policy that a home can buy access to fibre to the premises. Sure, we can argue about price another time, whether it's between $2,000 or $6,000, but to actually have that on offer means the pits and pipes over that last 500 metres to a kilometre are not just going to be accessed once, they're going to be accessed every single time a home wants to take up the option, as per the policy, of fibre to the premises. So both parties in this chamber, whoever is the government of the day after the 15th of September, has a policy that every single pit and pipe in this country over the next decade will be accessed. And I would hope that we push Telstra, their management, their shareholders, to handle asbestos according to the long-established principles on the safe handling of a very dangerous product. But to turn it into some sort of political divide in an exercise of political expediency to blow up an agreed position on the completion of the national broadband network is just cheap, and it is wrong. And it is disingenuous in this debate to try and imply one policy will be safer than the other and one side of the parliament has more foresight than the other. Telstra owns the pits and pipes. They have taken the money from government to upgrade those pits and pipes, including dealing with asbestos as part of that upgrade. Whichever policy after the 15th of September is the one that leads to the completion of the national broadband network, access over the next decade to every single pit and pipe in this country will be a necessity. It's a lie to suggest otherwise. So the agreed principles on handling asbestos should certainly be an issue that this chamber pushes Telstra to deliver upon. But that doesn't mean one policy is better than the other. It doesn't mean one policy is safer than the other. And it certainly doesn't mean the principle of equity shouldn't be delivered to communities like mine in a telecommunications upgrade that is desperately needed in this country. Our copper network is full. The infrastructure that is around the copper network is rubbish. The industry does need to be restructured and split between retail and poles and wires as part of agreements reached to date. We do deserve in this country of ours to have ubiquity across a wholesale platform. We do deserve to have speeds better than 25 megs as part of engaging with a globe around us. We do deserve to have reliability. We do deserve to have retail competition under that wholesale platform that is actually at a good and decent and fair price. This is all part of the upgrade and the biggest infrastructure upgrade of our time going on right now. I've heard people talk about the want and desire for vision. Well, this is the vision for this nation. It is the largest infrastructure build of our time. The rules around asbestos are clear. The rules around asbestos are the same for both sides. The impact in dealing with the pits and pipes will be the same. Let's get on with the job. And by all means, push Telstra, Union, Liberal Party, Ray Hadley, whoever, the people of Penrith, but don't turn an issue around mishandling of asbestos according to the current rules into an exercise of trying to blow up a really important infrastructure build for our nation, one that finally delivers on the principle of equity. We are an isolated country. We're a big isolated country. Our telecommunications system should match the best in the world. This is it. Let's deliver it. Let's get over the politics.
The member for Greenway.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to make some very brief comments in contributing to this debate. The first is the very title of this matter of public importance that's been brought towards the House, and that being the issue of a threat. And as the member for Lyons so rightly pointed out, there is indeed a threat in this parliament. There is a threat to high-speed broadband on an equitable, accessible and ubiquitous level. There is a threat to that being delivered, and that is any plan other than something that delivers absolute equivalence in wholesale pricing to ensure that we eliminate the digital divide as between regional and metropolitan areas and indeed outer metropolitan areas. And Mr Deputy Speaker, what I've heard here today from those opposite, including the member for Wentworth, is again the same old arguments to put Labor's NBN down, to try and promote the very aptly named fraudband policy, the uncosted policy that they released, universally lampooned, and indeed this does strike, I know, a very raw nerve for the member for Wentworth, because even after their long-awaited plan was released, 73% prior supported Labor's NBN, and after the coalition plan was released, that went up to 78%. So it's very clear that this does strike a very raw nerve with those opposite. And I would say also, Mr Deputy Speaker, some of those have come into this debate here today and over the last few days suddenly becoming experts on asbestos. Well, no one needs to tell me, Mr Deputy Speaker, about asbestos and how harmful it is, because as the AMWU has well documented, 2 out of 3 homes in Australia built between World War II and the early 1980s still contain asbestos. And there's what's called the asbestos belt around metropolitan Sydney, the suburbs for which asbestos is rife in dwellings. And the top 3 on that list are actually in my electorate and include the suburb in which I was born and where my family home still is and probably does contain asbestos. Those suburbs being Seven Hills, Layla Park and Blacktown. And no one needs to tell me about the importance of making sure that this material is properly handled and disposed of. And when you go around those suburbs and many of the other suburbs in what's known as the asbestos belt, you'll see a lot of knockdown rebuilds happening, a lot of fences up, a lot of asbestos removal taking place. So it is very well known to people of my community, and it's certainly something not lost on myself, about how important the issue of safe asbestos handling practices is. And I would say also, Mr Deputy Speaker, people have come in here in this debate in the last few days suddenly bemoaning the issue of asbestos and things we need to do to protect people. Well, where were these people, particularly those people from New South Wales, when the New South Wales Liberal state government slashed workers' compensation laws recently, which would include the prospect of asbestos victims losing access to their rightful workers' compensation entitlements in New South Wales? I find it absolutely extraordinary that those people would come in here and start talking about their commitment to asbestos clearance. And I will say also, Mr Deputy Speaker, I probably couldn't have put it better than Bernard Keane, just reading some of his comments from today about the performance of the member for Wentworth. And the member for Lyne, I think, put it very succinctly when he talked about this being an attempt to promote a policy of the opposition which is actually failing, and a policy from Labor which is actually very popular in the community. And as I listened, I think Bernard Keane took the words out of my mouth as I listened to the member for Wentworth yesterday in particular. And he writes, "Alas, the Turnbull of Godwin Gretsch fame, rather than Spycatcher fame, showed up. Well, Turnbull, perhaps humming Janet Jackson's 'What Have You Done For Me Lately?' demanded to know what else Shorten had done beyond stray outside his own responsibilities to pursue the issue." And then, of course, we reached the point in question time yesterday where the opposition retreated to Old Faithful of turn back the boats. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I find it absolutely extraordinary also that those opposites should come in here, the member for Wentworth come in here and again talk about and put down the National Broadband Network and say that it's not meeting its targets. Well, as can be very clearly seen at the end of May, NBN Co is on track to beat its revised June rollouts. It is on track to pass between 171,836 and 185,808 premises with fibre by the end of June, far exceeding the target that's set. And I'll just end by saying, Mr Deputy Speaker, just on the issue of the opposition claiming Labor's NBN is going to cost $90 billion, this figure that somehow appeared on the day fraudband was released. Well, shortly after that, we had an NBN public hearing where questions were put directly to NBN Co in a hearing, very specifically asking, and the chairman knows that very well, very specifically asking how could you possibly come up with this $90,000 figure, and no credibility to that figure whatsoever. And secondly, if you were to properly cost an alternative proposal, what are all the other things you would have to do, such as the operation and maintenance of the pits and the ducts and so forth? And as the member for, I'll end by saying the member for Lyne very rightly points out that even if you look at this own document, the fraudband document itself, where the opposition has come in and is also saying publicly that the risk is far diminished under their policy, it's exactly the same risk. It's exactly the same pits. So we won't have any of this nonsense, Mr Deputy Speaker, any of this nonsense coming from the opposition. They have no credibility on this issue whatsoever.
Thank the member for Greenway. The member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And in rising to speak on this very worthy motion, I want to note that the member for Greenway, the only thing that is failing in relation to this is the NBN rollout. And the member for Greenway is disingenuous to say that our policy is failing when the targets for the NBN rollout have been downgraded for a third time by the government. And can the member for Greenway answer this question, given now that with a third downgrade it would now take 109 years for the full rollout of the NBN to happen? She neglects to mention it. 109 years on the current targets. But the member for Greenway comes here and says, well, the revised targets are being met. After three downgrades, member for Greenway. So we didn't meet the first target, so we'll downgrade them. We didn't meet the second target, so we downgrade them. We didn't meet the third target, so they'll be downgraded. Straight out of the New South Wales Labor playbook. The trains aren't running on time. Our solution is let's change the timetables. The trains still don't run on time. Well, now running is going to be 20 minutes instead of 5 minutes either way. That's straight out of the New South Wales Labor playbook, and nobody in this country is going to fall for it. But today, Mr Deputy Speaker, we're on a much more serious issue, and that is in relation to the botching of the NBN rollout in suburbs around our country. And this is a serious issue. And I do think it's disingenuous of the member for Lyne to get up here and say this chamber's got to ensure that pits are managed safely. That is the problem about this approach to government by the government, supported by the member for Lyne. They think they are experts in telecommunications. We have so many frustrated telecommunications executives standing in this chamber. Perhaps there's really only one, and that's the member for Bradfield, I'd say to you, member for Lyne. The reality is we don't know how to roll out these things properly, and they have to be done by the experts, the telecommunications companies. And when government gets involved, when government tries to rush these things for a political agenda, this is the thing that happens. If you don't do a cost-benefit analysis for a major project like an NBN, and if you don't support us in moving for a cost-benefit analysis, member for Lyne, you'll find that these are the consequences. Things are rushed. Things get missed. A cost-benefit analysis was not conducted in relation to the biggest piece of infrastructure expenditure in this country's history. No cost-benefit analysis. So then are we surprised that nobody thought of what is the cost of ameliorating asbestos in pits? That would have been one of the considerations of a cost-benefit analysis in relation to the NBN. Consideration could have been given. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, that is the problem with government taking over this style of project, and that is the problem with what is happening today. With the time I have remaining,